Don, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. It's an honor to be able to talk to you a little bit about what I'm passionate about in helping people that have ongoing unresolved health issues to really dig down and figure out why they're experiencing those problems and how we can actually help them to address those underlying issues so they start to feel better and get their lives back. And so that's what we do every day in our office. What I'm going to talk to you today about specifically is just one of the many symptoms that a lot of people have that we help, and that is with memory loss. So we're going to talk about 9 things that you can do, even going home today, you can get started on to help not only reverse memory loss, but as you'll see by the time we're done talking today, these are things that you can do to help prevent memory loss from coming down the road as well. So as I said, we help people with these ongoing issues, one of them being memory loss. And most of the things that we are passionate about in life, we have a personal connection to, and I think you would probably agree with that. And that's the case with this group. You all have a common interest, and you're led by Dot, and she's very passionate about that. And so my connection to this is that my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's in 2012, and so she was diagnosed back in the mid-2000s. And she suffered with that for about 8 years before it finally claimed her life. And so we, as a family, had to experience that long goodbye, as I'm sure some of you have as well. And so that connection with my Nana is what drives me to help other people potentially to stave off that from coming down the road as much as we possibly can. And then when you start to get some of those symptoms, how can we potentially slow down that progression, or maybe even stop it and reverse it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So in regards to Alzheimer's, and that's kind of the worst case scenario when you get that diagnosis, Alzheimer's is just one form of dementia. So dementia is the overall category, and that is a series of issues with memory. And so Alzheimer's is a specific type of dementia, and it's just specific based on what's actually going on in the brain. So there's buildup of these plaques and degeneration in the brain that occurs specifically to Alzheimer's. So currently there's about almost 5.5 million people that in the United States that have Alzheimer's, and that's expected to rise to over 13 million by 2050. And the costs associated with that are expected to put a huge strain on the system and actually bankrupt Medicare. Based on the projections that they're saying, this is going to be the biggest cost to the federal government by this time, is just caring for people with Alzheimer's. It is the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States, and it actually affects women the most. And so that's a good reason for me to be here talking to this group. In particular, 2 ways that it affects women. Number one, 65% of the patients that have Alzheimer's are women, and you have a greater chance of that than you do of getting breast cancer. And then 60% of all of the caregivers for those that have Alzheimer's are also women. So it does affect you more than it does the men. My encouragement for you today is that there is hope. And I only wish that I had the tools that I'm going to talk to you about today to share with my grandfather and my Nana when she was first diagnosed, because we could have potentially helped her at that point. So hopefully this will be helpful for you. And when we get into some of the aspects of what we're going to talk about today, if you feel like that it could benefit somebody else, please share any of the information we have for you today with them as well. So let's first talk about what's currently being done for Alzheimer's. And this is a quote from, and I'll read it for you in just a second. This is a quote from a doctor who did a study out in the University of California at Berkeley, and his research is most of what I'm going to focus on today. And what he says is that for Alzheimer's disease in particular, there's not a single therapeutic that exerts anything beyond a marginal, unsustained symptomatic effect with little or no effect on the disease progression. So what does that mean in regular words? So what they're saying is that there's no pill that you can take that has anything beyond a little bit of an improvement in the symptoms and has nothing to do with actually stopping the progression of the disease. So there's no medications out there that are going to stop it. They do help a little bit with the symptoms, is the basic gist of it. So what we have to do instead is we have to think about how can we take a more comprehensive approach to this? And looking at this particular chronic condition, Alzheimer's disease, from a multifaceted approach, meaning coming at it from multiple different angles, not just taking one medication, is the best way to go about it, and that's what was found in the research. And really that's what we do with all of our patients regardless of what they're coming in for. So some of the chronic conditions that we help people with, thyroid disease, diabetes, neuropathy, we even help kids with ADHD, which is the most common chronic condition in children. How do we help them? It's not just a single avenue. We come at things from multiple different angles. So as you see kind of in that diagram there's multiple pathways from one point to the next. So if you take, I don't know if you can see this picture, but these are two guys that are frantically mopping up the water on the floor, and you'll see in the background there's the sink that's still overflowing. So what's the problem with this? They're not addressing the root cause of the issue, right? And so this is essentially what's happening with the current system in a lot of areas of chronic conditions. They're addressing the symptoms, but a lot of times we're not getting to the root cause of the issue. So if they just turn the faucet off, they don't have to worry about mopping forever and ever. Eventually there'll be an end point there. So this is what's going on with most of the chronic condition care, as I mentioned, in the standard medical model. Let me give you a couple examples of that. So for thyroid disease, as I mentioned, you take a medication, you get some extra thyroid hormone, but that thyroid hormone, does not actually address the underlying root cause of why your thyroid is not working to begin with. So for most people, there's actually an autoimmune condition where your immune system's attacking your thyroid, and that's why you have to take the medication. But the medication doesn't actually help your immune system. So there's a bunch of other things that can be done to help your immune system, and that's what we do. So same thing for diabetes, blood sugar control. You take a medication to keep your blood sugar in check, but that's a lifestyle disease, and so you can work on things from a lifestyle perspective to really get to that root cause. Same thing for things like neuropathy, where you have burning and tingling in your feet, numbness, that kind of thing. ADHD in kids, another chronic condition. It's usually just an underdevelopment of certain areas of the brain. If we can encourage better development in those areas of the brain, we see dramatic improvements in kids, and they're able to focus and pay more attention. So the bottom line of this slide is we want to get to the root cause of the issue and address it from that perspective, rather than just trying to mask the symptoms. So this is the research, Dr. Bredesen out of University of California at Berkeley, and his comprehensive approach was individualized for each person. So, when you take a medication like Aricept, which is one of the standards of care for Alzheimer's, everybody gets the same drug. Yeah, you might have a different dosage, but it's not necessarily a customized program for what your body needs. So what this doctor did and what we do in our office is we customize a program for each individual person based on what their test results say. We address the issues that we see on the test results, we improve the function of the body on the inside, and then they start to feel better on the outside. And so that's essentially what happened here. So what they did was they looked at 10 patients, and they had a wide variety of different in terms of the progression of the disease. So they had people who had some mild cognitive impairment all the way through end-stage Alzheimer's. So 9 out of those 10 patients saw subjective or objective improvement. Subjective is they reported they were improved. Objective means that it was measured through testing that they were improved in 3 to 6 months of doing what we're going to talk about today. 6 of the 6 that had to discontinue working. So what that means is 6 of those 10 total had to stop working. All 6 of those were able to go back to work. And some of them actually, as I'll show you later in some examples, were able to continue to further their education. And then at 2 years follow-up, this is key, 2.5 years after being on the program, all of those improvements were sustained. So those people were still working, the 9 people were still measuring improvements. And the only person they didn't see improvement in was the one who was in the late stage. So once you end up in that late stage of Alzheimer's, unfortunately, you've actually physically changed the brain with those, the buildup of the plaques and the proteins. And there's very little at that point that you can do to reverse it. So when we take a comprehensive approach, we want to make sure that, we start with blood work. So are we looking at just a standard blood work you would see on a physical? No, we're going much more comprehensive than that. So we're looking at a lot of different components of it, and then when we look at those lab values, are we looking at it just in the standard reference range, we're going to narrow that range and make it tighter so that we can be more specific for you and make sure that we're getting you in a healthy range, not just an okay range, so to speak. So I don't know if you can see this, but there's a continuum for these blood sugar numbers. It says sugar at the top and then A1C and some insulin. So this is kind of things we look at for people with blood sugar issues. But in the center there is the optimal, or the green. And as you start to go outside in either direction is where we start to see dysfunction that's contributing to the symptoms. And so when you get your standard blood work, you just need to be inside the red zone, somewhere in between that wide range. We want to tighten that down. We want to get you into that, if not the yellow zone, all the way down to that green zone so that things are functioning the way that they should be the best. So this is secret number one, reducing inflammation. How many people have heard of inflammation before? Yeah, everybody, good. So inflammation is really the driver of all chronic diseases. So how do we reduce inflammation? Well, first of all, you have to figure out where the inflammation is coming from. And for a lot of chronic diseases in the United States, the inflammation is actually coming from the gut. And so the first bullet point up there is talking about healing leaky gut. So leaky gut is when the lining of your intestine is not protecting you from things getting through your intestine and into your bloodstream the way it's supposed to. Almost all patients that have neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's have leaky guts. In fact, they are starting to connect issues in the gut is what is causing Parkinson's disease. It travels up your vagus nerve from your gut right into the brain stem, where you have production of dopamine, which is, if you know anything about Parkinson's, that's the issue. You got not enough dopamine. So bad guts create this inflammation that gets to the brain and can make worse anything you've got going on in the brain. So usually what happens first is you lose function that you already had a problem with. So I'm going to call out my office manager for a second. Kathleen has difficulty with math. She'll be the first to tell you that. So hopefully she won't have memory loss and dementia when she gets older, but if she did, first thing to go would be what? Her math, because it's already bad. So that's the things you're going to notice. The things that you're already not so great at, they're going to get worse to begin with. One of the biggest things that we want to look at, aside from gut function, is blood sugar. Those are the numbers that I just showed you before as an example. In the literature, for about the past 7 or 8 years, they've been calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So that means it's blood sugar related. And if your blood sugar is not well regulated, even if you're on a diabetes medication, it's really not well regulated, then that can contribute to memory loss. 60 to 70% of people with diabetes have mild to severe forms of nervous system damage. Nervous system starts in the brain, goes down your spinal cord, into your hands and feet. So whether it's a memory loss, which is what we're talking about today, or one of the other things that actually happens first is you get neuropathy, which I talked about before. So you start to get tingling and numbness in your toes, starts to travel up your ankle and your legs. Eventually, as it progresses, it'll go into your hands as well. And so this is one form of the nervous system damage you can get from that blood sugar issue, but it can then cause problems in the brain itself, leading to the memory loss. So what we want to do is get the blood sugar under control, optimize it by looking at some of these markers that we look at on our blood work, and getting them into that optimal, that green zone, and out of the red zone. So if I kind of go back here. This is a patient that we did help with diabetes. His sugar was 263. Those of you that measure your blood sugar, you know that's way too high. His hemoglobin A1C was 11.2, way high, and his insulin function is actually, it's not terrible, but that's because he was on insulin, so that kind of skewed that number a little bit. But we want to get those numbers down into that green zone for it to be optimal. Okay, number 2. So I actually switched the order of these last night when I was preparing, and I moved inflammation up to number 1 because you're going to see that come back in all of the other ones. It's a common feature. So number 2 is to use food as medicine. So ultimately, especially with things like blood sugar issues, which I already said is one of the most common factors associated with memory loss, is blood sugar is a lifestyle thing. So if you lifestyle your way into it, we can use lifestyle to back our way out of it. So what are ways that you can do to use medicine? So you want to use food as medicine, excuse me. minimize carbohydrate intake. So you want to have more of the good protein and actually more of the good fat. And some people look at me funny when I say that, because over the past 20 years or so, low-fat diets have been the standard, and we've also seen cholesterol, wanting to lower cholesterol. Well, let me talk to you about your brain. Your brain is mostly fat and water. So we all get the water, we're not really concerned about that. So the rest of the brain is made up of fat. We got to make sure that we're not having artificially lowered levels of fat and have that impact our brain. So one of the things that we see also as an example of this is in neuropathy. I'm going to come back to that again. One of the other causes of neuropathy besides blood sugar problems is cholesterol medication. So the cholesterol medication brings your cholesterol down. Cholesterol is a fat. And then you don't have that cholesterol in your nerve cells going down to your feet, and they start to function improperly, creating this numbness and tingling. And so cholesterol is a problem if you have a lot of inflammation, which is what we talked about before. So when people have high cholesterol, and we're looking at that, if they have inflammation, we get that under control, and then we're not so worried about the cholesterol. And I think in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see the mainstream of medicine moving towards keeping healthy levels of fat and cholesterol to help support better brain function, because it's having such an impact on it. So reducing inflammatory foods, carbohydrates, sugars, avoiding foods that you might react to. So if you start to kind of track what you're eating and you think, oh man, every time I have XYZ food, milk, whatever it is, I get a headache. I get a headache every time I have milk, so I don't drink milk. So it's just kind of that simple, and if you can figure out which one it is, you pull it out of your diet, it's going to be super helpful for you, because if it's causing a symptom like that, it's driving inflammation and making things worse for you. You also want to eat a variety of colors. So colors provide these compounds called flavonoids. They're protective of your brain. And greens are your friend as well. So the salad today was an excellent example of this. There were 3 colors in there that I saw: green in the lettuce, red in the tomatoes, and then orange in the carrots. So that was great. We got 3 of about 6 or 7 different color categories that are very helpful for brain function. Make sure I've covered everything here. Okay. So number 3 is reducing stress. Nobody's got stress in here, right? Okay, so what happens is stress creates a compound called cortisol. Cortisol is your stress response hormone. It helps your body to respond to stress. Yes, physical, emotional type stress, but also physiological stress. And this cortisol, if it's elevated for too long, you have prolonged periods of stress, this cortisol damages a part of your brain called hippocampus. Hippocampus is right over here in your temporal lobe. This is where you have conversion of short to long-term memory. So this cortisol being elevated from stress damages that part of the brain, has a huge impact on your memory. So how do we fix that? Reducing stress. How do you do that? There's all kinds of different ways. Obviously, this group is a pro at number 4. It's such a blessing to hear the devotional today and be reminded of that. Just that, you guys come in here on do you meet monthly? Come in here monthly and fellowshipping and getting devotional and praying together is one component that you can implement with this. So we want to make sure that we're reducing that stress in a multitude of different ways. And this is one of the things that I talked with a patient about last week. We were kind of hitting a roadblock in terms of her improvement, and we really had to dig down on the stress and what was causing her stress and what ways that we could help her to alleviate that stress so we can keep moving forward with her. Okay, number 4 is optimize sleep. So you want to try to get about 8 hours of sleep per night. As you get older, you don't need as much sleep, so maybe in the 6 to 7 hours, it may be enough for you at this point. But if you're waking up tired, then you're probably not getting at least enough restful sleep. One of the ways you optimize sleep is reduce inflammation. So that goes back to number 1. Another thing that you want to do is make sure that you're supporting your melatonin metabolism. So melatonin is what helps your body to start to shut down as the day goes on to get ready for sleep. Normally this happens as the sun goes down. So as the sun goes down, you don't have as much light going into your eyes. That goes back into your pineal gland, which produces melatonin. You don't have as much light. You start to ramp up your melatonin production, that gets you ready for bed. When this sleep-wake cycle is influenced and disturbed, you start to have problems with sleeping. This is your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycle. It's also controlled by what we talked about previously in regards to cortisol. So I talked about that cortisol being a stress response hormone. Those adrenals that produce that cortisol are also involved in your sleep. So kind of 3 and 4 go together. If you're stressed, you're probably not going to sleep very well either. That's when you get in bed and your mind is just racing and racing. It's not preparing itself to turn off and go to sleep. So tracking these rhythms, the circadian rhythms, can be very helpful in predicting the possibility of cognitive decline coming on down the road. And so what we can do is to help normalize inflammation by what we talked about before. This can be very helpful for normalizing sleep. Okay, exercise. Effective, efficient exercise 4 to 6 days a week. So we're not talking about going to the gym at all. I've not seen your facility here, but it sounds like you've got some things that you can use at the church. And I think Dot said that there was a walking track, and that's perfect. If all you can do is walk down to your mailbox and come back, that's where you start. And so you don't have to make it complicated and go buy a gym membership and try to get a personal trainer. If you're not at that level, it doesn't make any sense to do that, and you're going to get discouraged and quit pretty quick. So you start where you're at and with what you're able to do at this point. You want to try to continue. You've all heard the use it or lose it principle. It applies with your brain and also the rest of your body. So if you just kind of give up and have a neighbor get your mail because you just don't, you get tired walking down the mailbox. If you physically can still do it, you should try to do it, even if you get tired afterwards. And actually helps with, going off topic a little bit, helps with arthritis. So the more you move, it's painful in the moment, but that movement is key to helping stave off additional arthritis down the road. So studies have shown that strength training, aerobic exercise, all that kind of stuff helps to protect your brain cells, increase blood flow to the brain, which is important, and prevent against the damage that's associated with Alzheimer's. And so they showed that those who exercise show the least amount of brain shrinkage. And so walking as little as 30 minutes a day, a couple days a week, can increase the size of the part of the brain that's responsible for learning and memory, that hippocampus that we talked about. So they did studies where they'll measure people who were walking 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, people who not, and they measured that area of the brain, the hippocampus, that's responsible for memory. It's actually getting bigger, which means it's working better in those who are walking. So it can just be as simple as coming here with a group of ladies, going upstairs and walking around the track a couple times a week. So like I said, start with what you're able to do. Don't try to be over-ambitious, because then you're likely to get discouraged and not continue. Okay, number 6 is energy production. So how do we optimize energy production? Well, in every single one of your 100 trillion cells in your body, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of little tiny organelles called mitochondria. Those are the powerhouses of the cell. So if you ever had high school biology then they may have talked about that. So this powerhouse is what creates the cell, or creates the energy. Without the energy, the cells don't function well. So brain cells start to degenerate if they don't have enough mitochondria. And our brain cells are the ones that use the most energy. So mitochondrial dysfunction, problems with making energy, has been linked to a lot of chronic diseases, not only dementia, but also diabetes and heart disease as well. And we start to lose the efficiency of those mitochondria at age 30. So your efficiency decreases about 1 to 2% per year every year afterwards. So you got to really start working on how can you improve that efficiency. There's a number of different ways that you can do that. Exercise actually is one of them. There's also a supplement. It's the second one listed up there. It's called PQQ. And this has been shown in the literature to reverse cognitive impairment, improve your memory, help people who are recovering from strokes, slow the damage that's caused by some of these neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. And it's also protective of the heart. So we actually have a supplement that we use from one of our companies that has the first two combined together, the CoQ10, which is important for mitochondrial function, and then the PQQ, which is very helpful for brain function as well. Number 7 is supplement deficient nutrients. This one's pretty easy. Looking at the blood work, some of the things that we look at, calcium, we look at magnesium deficiencies are one of the things that can contribute to inflammation in the brain and creating this degeneration. In fact, one of the new medications that you can take for memory loss is called Namenda, and that is basically just magnesium with a fancy tag on it so that they can sell it as a drug, but it's basically just magnesium. Looking at things like vitamin D, antioxidants, fat. Remember, I talked about fat before, so omega-3 fatty acids, this is your fish oil. Okay, there's specific types and components of this that are better for brain than others. You might look on the bottle and see EPA is one form, and then DHA is the other form. EPA is better for your heart. DHA is better for your brain. But omega-3 fatty acids are important. Medium chain triglycerides is just another type of fat. You're going to get some of that more from things like coconut, which is very helpful to make sure that your fat levels are adequate. Some of the other things that can contribute, B12 deficiency. B12 deficiency can be caused by a number of different things, some of them genetic, some of them autoimmune. Autoimmune is when your immune system is actually attacking some part of your body. In this case, it would be attacking your gut, and it has an impact on your digestion and absorption of the B12. So this is, I say it's easy to do because it's just kind of run the test, and then if you're deficient, you take it, but obviously you have to get the test run. And things, let me just kind of run down a list, things that most people should be on. Antioxidants, you want to take antioxidants. You want to take fish oil, and you want to eat things with coconut, good fats, coconut, avocado, nuts, very good levels of fats in those. The other thing you want to do is balance your hormones. So there's all kinds of different hormones. You've got thyroid hormones, reproductive hormones, stress hormones. So thyroid is a big one. I mentioned this briefly earlier when talking about what types of conditions we help people with. Probably 70% of our practice is helping people with thyroid disease. The reason why is because this is one of the most prevalent chronic conditions, and unfortunately the medication, while it is helpful to replace the hormone, it doesn't get to that root cause. And actually, before I came here this morning, I was on Your Carolina with Jack and Megan, and we were talking about thyroid disease and what the root causes are and how we help with that. But that's one of the things that has to be under control. If you don't have proper thyroid function, it's going to have a huge impact on your brain function overall and contribute to basically brain fog. So a lot of memory components to that. One of the most common symptoms that we see when patients come in, they've got brain fog, they can't find their keys, a lot of difficulty with cognitive function. So we got to get that thyroid hormone under control and better regulated because it has a huge impact on the metabolism of every cell in your body. Looking at the reproductive hormones, once you're postmenopausal, you don't have the fluctuating hormones throughout the month, but sometimes some of these hormones can dip down and they don't go back up. So low levels of hormones like estrogen and testosterone have been linked to memory issues. And one of the ways that is taken care of in traditional medicine is to just do a replacement hormone of testosterone or estrogen. Before you go down that road, I really encourage you to make sure that your doctor is trying to identify the reason why your hormones are low to begin with. And go all the way back to number one, inflammation. That's a key critical component as to why the hormones might be low to begin with. So again, before we were replacing the hormones, we want to get to the root cause and see if we can address that. So before I'll even test hormones on most people, we'll make sure that their blood sugar is working well, thyroid is working well, and also make sure their adrenals associated with that cortisol is working well also. And the last thing is the stress hormone, which is the cortisol as we talked about already, as it relates to damaging that memory center in your temporal lobe. All right, last one here, number 9, is adequate brain stimulation. So I'm not talking about electric shock therapy. That's not what we're looking at. But if you go back to the use it or lose it principle. So if you don't use different parts of your brain, you're going to lose them. Their function is going to decrease. And so a lot of times people will say, well, I can't remember phone numbers anymore, so I'm not going to try to remember them anymore. But you really have to use those areas that are weak and practice them. and that's how you're going to increase the function, or at least keep what you've got left. So in order for your brain to work well, you have to have three components for every brain cell in order to work. It's got to have fuel, that comes from the food that we ate today. You have to have oxygen, that's what we breathe in. And then what happens is that fuel and that oxygen get combined together to make the energy, and that's in those mitochondria that we talked about before. But you also have to have adequate stimulation or activation of the brain as well. How do we know if we get enough oxygen? Well, you go to the doctor and you might put a little pulse ox on there, that's helpful. But just at home, you can look at your circulation in your hands and feet. If you have cold hands and feet, you're likely not getting adequate circulation to them. And if you're not getting adequate circulation to your hands and feet, you're likely also not getting adequate circulation to your brain. Although it's not as far away, you're going against gravity in this direction. So that's kind of one of the keys that we look at to see if we have adequate circulation. So how do we stimulate the brain? There's all kinds of brain-based exercises we can do, and you can be as creative as you want for these, but we want to be specific to you as an individual. So if Kathleen comes in and she's having math difficulty, then we're going to look at how can we stimulate the part of her brain that has to do with math, which is the left parietal lobe in the back. So there's different types of activities we can have her do to stimulate that part of the brain, one of which is math. And so she didn't want to do that, but that's what's going to strengthen that area is practice. But we can do it from a number of different other ways as well. For example, the left parietal lobe is also where you feel all of the sensation on the right side of your body. So we could stimulate the right side of your body with vibration or all kinds of different things. Electrical stimulation on the right side of the body, that's going to travel over through your brainstem and go over to the left parietal lobe, and that will activate that as well. And that will actually help improve the function of that area in the math as well. So that's kind of what we do. We figure out what areas of the brain are not working as well as they should. In this case, if we're talking about memory, it's going to be the medial temporal lobe and the hippocampus. And then we work to improve and increase the function of that, making sure that we're getting enough fuel, oxygen, and then stimulate or activate that particular area of the brain. And another way, more high-tech way that we do that is through something called neurofeedback. And this is an example of us doing neurofeedback in our office. And you can see kind of all the little pictures on the left side there. Those are all different views of this person's brain and how it's functioning in comparison to a database of other people that don't have any symptoms. So we look for areas of the brain that are not matching up with the norm, so to speak. Those are the areas that we want to train through this feedback system. And this is, we do it with kids all the way up to older adults that have memory loss as well. So this is a picture of one of our kids that we're helping with ADHD doing his training session. Okay, I'm going to take questions in a few minutes, but I just want to give you a couple of examples from the study out of California of what they went through. They went through all of these things. In fact, actually, they didn't have to do all 9. I think they had to pick 6 of them and do just 6 of them. So the first one was a 67-year-old woman. She had progressive memory loss for about 2 years. She had a very demanding job, but she was unable to remember material she was reading. She couldn't remember the numbers, difficulty navigating on roads. That, by the way, is one of the most common initial signs that you've got dementia, is not able to find your way to common places you used to go to. Mixing up the names of her pets, she forgot where the light switches were in her home, and her doctor unfortunately told her that there was nothing that could be done. She remembered that her mother went through dementia and she didn't want to do that herself, and she actually considered suicide. She spoke to a friend who told her about the study. She joined the study. Within 3 months on the program, all of her symptoms were reversed. I'm hitting the wrong button here. All of her symptoms were reversed, and she was able to do all the things that she couldn't do before. Her memory was better than it had been even before things had started going downhill. So 2.5 years later, after going through the program, all of her improvements had remained. She continued to work. She had 1 relapse. The only time she lapsed is because she got sick. She got a viral illness. She stopped doing all the stuff she was supposed to be doing, and her memory started to decline again. So sticking to the principles that we talked about here today can be very, very helpful. Next one is a 69-year-old man. He was an entrepreneur, 11 years of progressive memory decline, and it was getting worse again over the last couple of years. He had difficulty recognizing people, very common as we go through that dementia. He would reread books thinking they were new books. He lost his ability to add columns very rapidly, which was necessary for his job. 6 months on the program, number one, he lost 10 pounds, so that was a nice side effect. He started to be able to recognize people again. He started to be able to manage his schedule, had quicker responses, could do all the calculations and numbers he had to do with his job. And the accelerated decline that he had saw over the last 10 years had stopped and it was not progressing anymore after that. And then the last one was a 55-year-old attorney, progressive over the last 4 years. She would leave the stove on, and this is very early onset, 55. She forgot about meetings. She had to actually record her conversations with people, had to take lots of notes on an iPad, then she would forget the password to the iPad, so she couldn't get into it. She couldn't learn anything new. Her children had noticed that she would just become lost mid-sentence. She'd be having a conversation and then gone. 5 months on the program, she no longer needed the iPad to take notes. She didn't have to record her conversations anymore. She was able to work again. And she learned a new language. She learned Spanish and started a new specialty in her field. So she was able to progress with her education. So there's just a couple of examples of putting these principles into practice can be very helpful to not only stop, but you can actually prevent memory loss with this as well. So this is just a review if you missed any of them. Reducing inflammation, food is medicine, reducing stress, optimize your sleep, make sure you exercise, optimize your energy production, supplement any deficiencies you have, balance your hormones, and then use and activate your brain. So what are the implications for this? Just quickly, if we can reverse memory loss, as was shown in this study, then doing these things, you can extrapolate that and say, well, if we can reverse it, then certainly it can be used as a preventative as well. And so this is what we work on with people in our office every day, is people who want to avoid going down the road of their relatives that have gone through that experience. I don't want to go through the same thing my Nana went through, and so I practice these principles myself, and hopefully down the road we won't have to deal with these issues. So prevention really is better than a cure, and you're going to end up having a lot better quality of life if you do things on the front end than trying to fix things on the back end after they've already occurred. And that's not new, but just to kind of encourage you in that. And this is what we do, as I mentioned, with all of our patients. Most people come to us already having symptoms, and we get them to the place where they want to be in terms of their health goals, and then we want to help to keep them there to prevent things from reoccurring down the road as well. So it's a quick cartoon as well, the doctor and the patient says, "Give it to me straight, Doc. How long do I have to ignore your advice?" And we've all thought this, because it's hard. I'm not going to lie about that. It is difficult to make changes, especially when you've been doing things the way you've been doing them for a long time. But you have to have that intrinsic motivation to want to get better and to prevent things from coming down the road in terms of dementia, and use that as your driving force and motivation, and obviously encouragement through prayer and things like that to help you get through what you need to do. So just briefly before I take questions, these are some of the other conditions that we help in our office. Anything that's basically if someone you know says, "I have all these symptoms, I feel terrible," the doctor doesn't know what's going on, then that's a good fit for them to come to our office and just see if it's going to work out and if we can help them. And I'll just point out another passionate area I have. The last bullet there, PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and traumatic brain injury, I'm very passionate about. I help veterans that have these. The care that they get at the VA is not adequate, and I know that from personal experience because my brother served in Iraq and had PTSD and brain injury, and ultimately that claimed his life. And so he's no longer with us, and my family's dealing with the aftermath of that. And so because of his passing, it became a passion of mine to help veterans that aren't getting the care that they need. And again, this is just another brain-based issue. And how do we help people with that? Essentially, we do everything we just talked about to help optimize brain function. And as of the end of last month, just a couple of weeks ago, I started a nonprofit foundation called Sergeant Zach's Freedom Foundation to help raise money so that we can continue to provide care to these veterans in the upstate areas without finances being a burden to them. And so I've asked that the honorarium that you guys are giving to me be directed to the foundation, so that money is going to help veterans get the care that they need. So when somebody comes to our office, we just do a free consultation because we want to make sure that it's a good fit. We want to make sure that you can ask questions of us and make sure that you understand who we are and what we do, and then we ask you questions and make sure that we think that we can actually help you. So we kind of go through a list of what do we think are some of the underlying root causes to whatever's going on. We determine if we're a good fit to work together, and if we're not, that's okay too. We'll refer you to where we think you need to go. And we go over the costs and things associated with that as well at the consultation. Okay, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. I used to be a teacher, so I like to answer questions, so please feel free. And I'll try to repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Yes?
If you've already had thyroid surgery and removed most of your thyroid, how do you bring that back under control?
Great question. So thyroid is the number one reason why people have thyroid disease is because there's an immune system that's attacking your thyroid. So once you've had it out, it may not be attacking your thyroid anymore, but it may still be attacking other parts of your body. We find that about 50% of people that have an autoimmune system that's attacking their thyroid, or was attacking before it was removed, is now attacking some other part of the body. So based on your symptoms, we would try to figure out what area of the body may be influenced by that, and we want to help address the immune system as the root cause of that, and eliminate things that are contributing to the autoimmune component of that, and then help support better immune function through nutrition as well. So again, it's just really trying to get to the root cause, because in that case, you obviously have to take the medication, and that's very important. But what other things are going on as well that might be contributing to how you're feeling if you have symptoms, and that's what we want to address with that. Great question. Any other questions? Yes?
What is white brain matter?
What is white brain matter? Good question. So the white matter is actually where the fat is, and that's why it's white. If you've ever seen, obviously, fat on a piece of meat, it's white. So the white matter of the brain is the fat. That's the area of the brain where we have the long tracts that are sending the signals from one spot to the other. And they're wrapped in this layer of fat. And that fat helps the signal to go faster. So when you don't have adequate levels of good fats from a cholesterol medication or whatever is decreasing your fat levels, that membrane, that fat wrapping starts to break down. And then you don't have proper communication, and you end up with things like neuropathy, burning, tingling, and then brain issues like memory loss as well. Great question. Yes?
What about hereditary?
In regards to memory loss?
Yes.
Yeah, it can run in families. It can be genetically related. There's a number of different causes that are contributing, and that's why it's basically the whole concept of what we talked about and what they did in the research was not just doing one thing, not just taking one medication, but trying to address it from multiple different angles. So I did talk about one genetic component in regards to B12 metabolism. There's a lot of genetic components to these chronic conditions. The same one that causes the genetic issue with B12 can also cause genetic issues related to neurological conditions like memory loss, as well as anxiety, depression, those kind of things as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yes? Okay, that's a great question. She said, does it matter what vitamins you take? Okay, so this is what I tell people. First of all, you want to take vitamins that are best suited for you as an individual, so when we put a vitamin plan together, we base it on the testing that we do, number one. And number two, the saying that you get what you pay for, it applies to supplements and vitamins, because there's not really a whole lot of regulation in this particular industry. So if you look back in the New York Times last spring, they did a study where they just randomly went to places like Walmart and Target and Walgreens, and they took supplements off the shelf and they did a chemical analysis to see, are these things that are on the label actually in the bottle? And for all the ones that they tested, they were not. What was on the label was not in the bottle. So you're saving a little bit of money, but you're not actually getting what you're paying for in terms of, you think that there's vitamin D in there, but there's not. It's mostly just like potato starch and sugar and stuff. So the supplements that we provide are only available from physicians' offices. They cost more. That's because they've gone through third-party verification. A third-party company comes in, they test the raw materials before they go into the supplement, and they test the supplement on the way out to make sure that what's on the label is actually in the bottle. So number one, you want to make sure that you're just doing it based specifically on what your needs are from some testing, and then getting them from reliable companies through a physician's office with a recommendation. Great question, thank you.
Should the FDA be checking those drugs?
So the FDA only regulates medications, so the things that you actually need a prescription for. But the supplements, like vitamins and minerals and that kind of thing, most of what we use, there is no regulation, not a whole lot of regulation over that. So they don't require it to be tested by third parties. So since it's not a requirement, a lot of companies do not. And so they just put whatever in there and throw a label on it. The physician grade companies, because we're offering them in our office or another physician's office, those companies do voluntarily do the proper procedures and get them tested, and so that's why they cost more, because they have to pay for that to get that done. Yeah.
The
Yes.
inflammatory foods.
Yes.
What is that? The bad foods?
Great question, and I kind of skipped over that. So inflammatory foods is mostly, you can think of anything that's white. So flours and sugars are extremely inflammatory. They're also very addictive, which makes it, that's why I said it's not easy to stop eating those things, because they taste good, they make us feel good. If you think about all your comfort foods, they're mostly white, right? And that doesn't really fit into that encouragement that I gave you to eat colorful foods. So that's where I would start, and that's when you do that. I also said reduce your carbohydrate intake. If you reduce those white flours and sugars, your carbohydrate intake is also going to go way down as well. Yeah, those are the most inflammatory ones. Good question. Any other questions I can answer? Yes?
Is that why people with gluten intolerant have gut problems?
Yes, she asked if that is why people with a gluten intolerance have gut problems. So gluten is a protein that's found in wheat, barley, rye, and it's increasingly in higher amounts in those things because they're genetically modified in the United States. And so that gluten protein tricks your immune system and messes it up and causes some of these autoimmune diseases like with thyroid disease. So if there's strong correlation between gluten sensitivity or intolerance or celiac disease and autoimmunity, and most common type of autoimmunity is with thyroid. We also see problems in brain function in terms of autoimmunity as it relates to some of these neurological disorders as well. So that's one of the things that we'll test is, do we have your immune system actually attacking your brain? If it is, then we really have to work on your diet to make sure that things that you're eating are not driving that process to be worse and making the symptoms worse just based on something that you're eating. Great question. I'll take one more because I don't want to keep you guys over. Okay, I was told I was okay. Yes?
Medications affect your system, you know, like I take a good many medications for
Yes.
heart.
Mhm.
So it kind of concerns me with blood thinners and all, because I didn't have the stigma in my feet until I started taking blood thinners.
Yeah. So medications unfortunately do have side effects. So ultimately what we want to do is try to figure out how can we help you figure out, why do you need those medications to begin with? Are there things that we can do for you from a natural perspective in terms of, diet and nutrition to help you maybe not need so many of those medications? And we don't tell anybody to get off of their medications. We want to address the underlying causes, and as you start to feel better, then we can talk with your doctor about helping you to do that. But yes, there's a lot of side effects with those medications, and when you thin out the blood, it doesn't have as much pressure to get to the extremities, so then you get some of that numbness and tingling there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody's wanting to
Yes.
know this. Is it covered by insurance?
That's a great question, and I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm sure, Dad.
So I have a couple of slides for that because I knew it was coming, so let's talk about that. So traditional medicine, in this case let's just talk about memory loss, Aricept, Namenda, those two common medications that you'll get. That's part of what we call the medical standard of care. So it's kind of, this box here is your standard of care. When you have memory loss, they do some tests, they see if you have Alzheimer's, and it's a clinical diagnosis. You can't run a test for Alzheimer's. The test is an autopsy, so you don't want to go in for that test. So that's what they do in the traditional medical system, is they'll give you the Aricept and Namenda. That's covered by insurance. If you do things that are outside of the traditional standard of care in medicine and start to do all this healthy stuff, they don't cover it. So let me kind of give you some examples here. Insurance pays to keep you alive, so it's awesome because it saves people's lives for that critical acute care that you need to save you from a heart attack or cancer or whatever. You need the insurance for that. But insurance does not necessarily pay to improve your quality of life. So this is an example. This is a hospital bill for a patient that spent 6 days in the hospital. And if you can't see it, the total bill was $153,161.25. So this was about $1,000 an hour for his hospital visits. And insurance pays for that because none of us can afford to pay for that bill, right? And so it saved this person's life, and that was essential. But in terms of once they get out of the hospital, in terms of helping improve quality of life, that's where it doesn't really play a huge role. So health insurance, I want you to think about like your car insurance. So your car insurance does not pay for your oil change or your upkeep and maintenance to help preventing it from falling apart down the road, right? And the same thing with health insurance. It's really designed to be, to work on the back end. It lets you get sick and then it will help get you better again, but it doesn't help with the prevention part. I once had a patient come in who had been in the hospital for 17 days, and the doctor had called him the $1 million man because they ran like literally $1 million worth of tests on him. And they called us before he was even out of the hospital because they knew when he got out he was still going to need help based on the fact that they saved his life, but it wasn't going to do a whole lot for his quality of life. So this is directly from Medicare's guidelines, and I'll read it for you. It says, a treatment plan that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, and prolong and enhance the quality of life, or therapy that's performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition, it is not a Medicare benefit. So that's just right out of their own handbook. It is what it is. Don't shoot the messenger. But a lot of even the private insurers don't. They follow the same guidelines that are set up by Medicare as well. So that's why we do the free consultation. There's no obligation with that. We talk about what's going on. We see if it's a good fit in multiple ways, one of them being financially as well, because we'll go over the specific costs for you at that appointment. And then it's just a couple of comments. When we help people, we ask them to share their story. We ask them some specific questions, and we don't ask them, was it worth the money? But they talk about that all the time. So a couple of patients, Alvin said, it costs some money, but boy, it's well worth it. Susan said, without your help, what do you have? And then Julie said, I thought, wow, this is going to cost some money, but it's my body, this is my life, and it's worth it. I have made a financial and a time investment. She drove an hour and a half to my office twice a week for 6 or 8 weeks. So it's not just time, our money was time as well. So she made that financial and time investment in health, and it's been worth it. I've had nothing but success and results that I'm happy and pleased with. So it's just a consideration that you have to make about where you place the value of what you're investing in. And that's really what it is an investment in your health. And so if you or whoever else is considering coming to talk to us, like I said, the first appointment is there's no charge for it because we want to make sure that it's a good fit in multiple different ways, and financially, obviously, is one of them as well. Going once, going twice. I'm not an auctioneer, but we're all done. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time. I hope you learned a lot. Have a great afternoon.